So, Gary, what are QROPS?
Well, QROPS are a fascinating piece of legislation and probably the biggest single piece of jargon that's come out of pensions legislation in recent years. It stands for Qualifying Recognised Overseas Pension Schemes. Now, what these are is we've all heard of EU directives, and the same one that allows the sort of freedom of movement of individuals within the European community also really then comes down to our monies and our savings in allowing us to move our monies and savings around. And that's what the QROPS facility actually provides. It's a facility that our Revenue and Customs Department have sort of said, yes, you can move these with you so your pension can go with you to a foreign jurisdiction.
Well, that sounds great. So how do they work?
Well, they work generally like most pension transfers. So some people over time will have moved their pension scheme from one pension provider to another. Now, that may be with work, it may be because of charges. A very good example, perhaps at the minute, is transferring from a personal pension to a self-invested personal pension. So you get more flexibility and more choice in terms of how they work. Now, from a QROPS point of view, it's very similar. You look at the transfer value that's actually available from your pension scheme, and you transfer it to a QROPS provider that may be in a jurisdiction such as the Channel Islands or the Isle of Man, and there's several others around the world that are also available.
Can someone transfer any type of existing pension into a QROPS?
There's a few areas that you can't, things like the basic state pension, and if you're entitled to a state second pension, those facilities can't be transferred into a QROPS. Now, a number of people in the UK will also be members of what we call final salary pension schemes, especially things like the NHS superannuation scheme, the civil service type arrangements. Now, it's unlikely that somebody in those pension schemes would benefit from a transfer into a QROPS arrangement, but it can happen in exceptional circumstances. But anybody who holds a private arrangement, such as a self-invested personal pension, personal pension schemes, additional voluntary contributions, can transfer that value into a QROPS arrangement.
Which types of people, then, are you seeing setting up QROPS, Gary?
The main people are people who are already what we might call expatriates, so have become resident in European jurisdictions, but it can be anywhere in the world. Also now we're getting more people who have the intention of actually moving and perhaps retiring or working abroad in the very near future.
We've spoken a little bit about their flexibility, and clearly they're appropriate for a lot of people from what we can understand so far. What are their principal advantages?
Right. Well, the main one that clients talk to us about is the no requirement to purchase an annuity or go into what's called alternatively secured pension by the age of 75 years. Now, by moving to a QROPS and being non-resident from the UK, that ruling largely falls away. Now, that in itself might not seem advantageous, but one aspect that people don't like about pensions is having to buy this annuity, and they then feel that the capital is actually lost. So ultimately on death, which I'm afraid comes to everybody, there's nothing left. There's nothing there to pass on to their heirs, their spouse, their beneficiaries. Now, in a QROPS, that requirement to buy this annuity is not there. So people can retain the pension fund for the rest of their life, and then on death, 100% of that fund value, whatever's left, can actually pass on to their nominated beneficiaries. Now, there's even more sort of benefits thereafter, in that the jurisdictions that you will tend to have QROPS in, places like the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, there won't be any tax levied on that amount of money that's paid over. Now, you've got to be careful. Some jurisdictions will have some form of death taxes or succession taxes. In the UK, we call it inheritance tax. But at least you'll know if you're in a QROPS environment and you've been non-resident from the UK, you'll have no liability to the UK inheritance tax on the monies that you pass down perhaps through to your family.
you're obviously a sophisticated financial advisor, so dealing with these sort of issues for you is common and every day. But maybe some people will still be concerned about taking their money out of the UK. What would you say to people who are concerned about putting money offshore, which is going to be some people?
Yes, and I think you must have concerns, because one thing in our favour, although there have been issues in the past, the UK has got a very, very good regulatory regime which covers the financial services industry. Now, we actually look at the various jurisdictions in which QROPS can be placed, and we tend to feel that places like the Channel Islands, like the Isle of Man, have a proper government-controlled legislative process with regard to financial services. They've both got investor compensation schemes which are similar, if not slightly better than the UK arrangements. And there's no sort of time barriers, language barriers in dealing in those jurisdictions, so people can feel very secure in transferring their monies there. Now, there are QROPS all around the world, and if people do want to consider those, you've really got to take the time and make sure that they're comfortable with their advisor of all the regulatory and legislative and insurance schemes that are in place to make sure there could never be a possibility of loss of funds. So yeah, great care needs to be taken in that respect, but certainly if you stay relatively close to home, those jurisdictions I've talked about, the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, can largely cover everything you'd need wherever in the world you might actually end up.
So, providing one stays reasonably close to home, that really people have very little to worry about in that respect, which, when you talk about the advantages, I imagine then they must be very popular. So let me ask you, are they popular?
Yes, certainly the people that are actually moving their monies into QROPS are extremely popular. One of the problems with pensions, though, is getting the message across that this actual facility exists. Most people who have actually come to us have actually seen something perhaps in a newspaper or been looking at their pensions and suddenly picked up on this bit of jargon, and almost to a person, if somebody is actually offshore and resident offshore, a QROPS it can be the best thing for them to do. Now, it's effectively just whether people are actually really aware of it. We've only been able to do individual transfers from a UK pension scheme into a QROPS realistically from December 2007. So we haven't even managed a complete year yet. And as the word gets out, more and more of these will actually be done.
That leads me to another question then. I mean, we sort of answered already, but I know I was looking at some figures the other day myself and looking at the number of people every year that are leaving the UK to retire overseas. And obviously this looks like a wonderful solution for them. Why have we not heard of them before?
Well, largely, QROPS was wrapped up in what we call the pension simplification legislation that came about in April 2006. And the rules and regulations for overseas pension transfers were quite complicated and largely borne out by occupational, so company pension schemes moving monies about. We've only recently had that legislation clarified, and then Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs giving authorisation to these companies offshore that they can actually receive pension monies. Now, what most people would find is if the pension company offshore didn't have QROPS status, and that's an approval process they have to go through with HMRC, our Inland Revenue, then the pension company in the UK wouldn't allow a transfer to the QROPS scheme. So the QROPS status is very, very important, and realistically those have only been available now for a very, very short time.
So nothing really untoward, it's just a question that it takes some time for these things to come to the surface, and now they're here, now we're all hearing about them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a good point. But some people can rest assured that the qualifying recognised overseas pension scheme, all of those words mean something in terms of getting that approval from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. There is an approval process. And those companies that have got QROPS status have given an absolute undertaking that they will follow the rules as laid down to accept those pension transfers into them.